Today, we're joined by one of Australia's most perceptive social psychologists and commentators, Hugh Mackay. For decades, Hugh has been helping us make sense of who we are, how we live, and what truly matters in our communities. His latest book, Just Saying, continues that mission with clarity, compassion, and a touch of provocation, inviting us to rethink the assumptions we carry and the stories we tell about ourselves and each other. I'm Ian Bunston, and welcome to the final episode of Monday Matters for 2025, and what a great way to conclude the program as we enter the Christmas season. Hugh, it's a pleasure to have you back again.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'm delighted to be among you again. It's starting to feel like a very familiar place.
It's great to have you back. Hugh, I was at your recent book launch, and you mentioned before the program today that you're going to do an even better presentation than you did at the launch here at Monday Matters. What a privilege for us. No pressure. But, it's great. So thank you for being our guest here today.
Thank you very much, Ian, and good morning, everybody. And I want to begin by saying something that I'm sure you all agree with, but we all have different ways of justifying this statement. But we humans are strange creatures, aren't we? And the particular way I want to justify that statement is by saying that we know that we belong to a social species. We know that we humans are hopeless in isolation. We know we need each other. We need groups, communities of all kinds, families, neighbours, colleagues, friends, members of Monday Matters, ukulele bands, choirs, book clubs, sports teams, anything. We need that sense of belonging, which is absolutely fundamental to the mental and emotional health of people who belong to a social species. We could have belonged to some other kind of species, but this is the one we belong to. So we know all that. And we've talked about that at Monday Matters on a previous occasion. And yet, how easily we seem to forget the importance of all of that to us. When you look at some of the recent choices, and by recent I mean over the last 40 or 50 years, some of the recent choices we've been making about how to live, for example, living in smaller and smaller households. The fastest growing household type in Australia is the single person household. Almost 30% of households now contain just one person. More and more people choosing to live from home, to work from home, which has lots of advantages, of course, but the great disadvantage that you're not working collegially. Our incredible levels of busyness, which often keep us apart from each other, and so on. There are many other factors. But we've been actually, by the choices we've been making about how to live, and of course, I should have mentioned our love affair with information technology as well, we've actually been eroding social cohesion. It seems as if even though we know all these things about our need of social cohesion, our need of community, our need of belonging, it seems as if we need constant reminders about how to make the most of being human. And that's where this little book, Just Saying, comes in. It's really designed by drawing on the wisdom of ancient and modern thinkers and writers. It's really encouraging us to get back to that core, essential idea that humans are social and that our need of each other must not be neglected. It's a series of brief, highly personal reflections on 25 quotations taken from people ranging from Confucius and Plato to Susan Sontag, Miles Franklin, Donald Horne, Samuel Johnson, Bertrand Russell, Gloria Steinem, as I say, ancient and modern. But there is this kind of golden thread that connects most of the quotes, not all of them, some of them are outliers, but most of them are connected by this idea that we have not just a need, but a duty to build and maintain social harmony, because that's the only way our species can survive, let alone thrive. Now, the quotes touch on themes, some we've discussed before in Monday Matters, but themes ranging from kindness and humility to power, prejudice, ethnic diversity, gender equality. Um, on the subject of gender equality, there are actually three chapters drawing on quotes from different people, including Plato, who some people think is the father of feminism, although I think feminism needed a mother, and that was probably Mary Wollstonecraft. But I've quoted in the book a remark made by Gloria Steinem back in 1970, on the cusp of really the second wave of feminism, the same year Germaine Greer published her book, The Female Eunuch. And in a lecture that she gave in 1970, Gloria Steinem said, the first problem for all of us, men and women, is not to learn, but to unlearn. Now, as we all know, it is much harder to unlearn than it is to learn. When we think we know something, we're very reluctant to let it go and replace it with something else. But that's what Steinem was saying. And of course, what she was saying back in 1970 was, men, you've got to unlearn all that stuff that's come to you from thousands of years of male supremacism. You've got to unlearn all the stuff about how women are second-class citizens and they're just here to support men and they're not entitled to the same privileges. They don't have access to the same positions, particularly positions of leadership and authority as men. Unlearn all that. But she was also saying, women, you've got to unlearn all that stuff too. You've been complicit and you've got to let go of the idea that you're somehow inferior to men or second-class citizens or here just to support men and so on. You've got to embrace the opportunities that are available to you in the spirit of true equality. Well, that was 1970, and you may say, well, this is 2025. Yeah, we pretty much unlearned all that stuff. And it's true that millions and millions of Australian men have fully embraced the spirit of the gender revolution, and millions of Australian women have embraced that as well. And we are living in a new age. If you ask me to reflect on the biggest single change in Australian society during my working life, which started in 1955, I would say no question. The biggest change is the radical shift in the place of women in our society and in the speed of our march towards gender equality, but we're not there yet. And so I think the Steinem quote is still relevant. There are still things we have to unlearn. And often they're things that seem just like light-hearted little remarks we make, little jokes. A woman rolls her eyes when a man says something and says, oh, a man would say something like that. Well, that can just seem like fun. But of course, what we're doing, in the same way as when we make apparently light-hearted remarks about people's race or ethnicity, we're perpetuating racism. And here we're perpetuating the prejudices, the stereotypes that have fueled gender inequality, even by these little light-hearted remarks that tap into all this ancient stuff that we're trying to unlearn. You know, when a man says, oh, women can't reverse park for nuts. Well, there may be a germ of truth. No. Joke. but little remarks like that, we can roll our eyes and say, oh, Ian would say something like that. That's all right. Or Julie would say something like that. Or Fred is hopeless at reverse parking, or Maisie is. But when we resort to making generalizations about gender, we're falling into the trap that Gloria Steinem mentioned. In a related chapter, as I mentioned, based on a quote from Plato, I suggest that it's time for Australia to follow the most educationally advanced countries in the world and abandon the nonsense of single-sex schools that can only serve to reinforce the sense of otherness between the sexes. There's a chapter on coping with change based on a very challenging, I think, very provocative quote from Buddha, who said, "Change itself is never painful." Cop that. Change itself is never painful. It's our resistance to change that's painful. That is hard to absorb, isn't it? We think some changes, life-changing, bereavement, illness, retrenchment, some of these changes seem to be inherently painful. But what Buddha's reminding us is that change is constant, and that if we can learn to expect change, then we'll be far more likely to accept it as part of life. And not just to accept it, but to acknowledge that actually, in spite of the fact that we are so, I mean, this is another of the paradoxes about human beings. We're so resistant to change, and yet change is good for us. Having to adapt, having to adjust, even to catastrophes, even to crises that come into our life. These things are good for us, keep the brain active, alert, and plastic. So let's learn to expect it and be ready to accept it when it happens. There's a chapter on the damage we inflict on ourselves when we take revenge, based on a brilliant quote from Confucius, which I really love. We think it's Confucius, not absolutely sure, but generally attributed to Confucius. Before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves. Because, of course, your revenge just replicates the bad behavior that offended you, and you're going to be burying 2 reputations. There's another chapter on the need, a quote that has come to us from many, many religious, spiritual, mystical, and philosophical traditions. This one from Mencius, ancient Chinese philosopher, on the need to concentrate on fixing our own faults before we worry too much about other people's. But underlying all of these quotes and my reflections on them is the constant reminder of our true nature as social creatures, leading to that inescapable fact about us that our common humanity is far more important than any of the shades of difference between us, even though the shades of difference between us are interesting. In fact, they're what makes life fascinating. Here, all the people online this morning, we've all got unique stories. We've all been on unique journeys. And when we start talking to each other about those journeys and about our view of the world and so on, we find how different we can all be, yet none of that is as significant as the common humanity we all share. When we engage, when we communicate, when we connect, that's when we're at our best, and we're at our worst whenever we let individualism get the better of us. Well, I'll give you a couple more examples of quotes from the book. But first, just think about why we are so interested, I'm assuming you are too, why we're so interested in quotations from the past. Why are they so good for us? Well, my take on that is that most of us are fascinated by the journeys of explorers, aren't we? Those intrepid souls who push boundaries, open up new frontiers, because they help us to understand the scope and complexity of the physical world we live in. We feel the same way, don't we, about scientists, geologists, biologists, botanists, astronomers, astrophysicists, medical researchers, because they're also pushing boundaries, opening up new frontiers in our understanding of life itself. Well, the mind has its boundaries, has its frontiers too. Our mental life is also a source of adventure and exploration. And so I think when we catch a glimpse into the minds of explorers of inner space, philosophers, mystics, psychologists, theologians, prophets, poets, other creative artists, their wisdom and insight, in the same way as we get it from explorers and scientists, their wisdom and insight can help us make more sense of ourselves and each other. And the quotes that I've chosen to include in this book, the 25, are a bit like, I think of them as signposts that can guide us on this journey towards understanding this wildly complex and fascinating thing that we call human nature. Some quotes, of course, lodge so firmly in our mind that they become part of us, don't they? Like borrowed wisdom, and we like recycling them to our kids or each other, not just to make ourselves seem smart, but because they express succinctly something that we perhaps have been struggling, something we believe or know, but that we've been struggling to articulate for ourselves. One such quote came to me, which I included in this book. It's one that I hadn't come across until I started preparing and doing the research for this book, but it came from Susan Sontag, a very controversial figure, of course. But Sontag said, interpretation is the revenge of the intellect upon art. Well, I had a lot of fun writing that chapter because I have long wondered whether we humans, particularly we highly educated Westerners, are just a bit too keen on trying to attach meaning to everything, wanting to interpret everything, find an explanation, preferably a rational explanation for everything. We look at an abstract painting and we say, yeah, but what does it mean? I've heard artists say they tear their hair out when they hear people say, what does it mean? Don't ask what it means. Just, is it beautiful? Does it move you? Do you respond in some way? Does it annoy you? Does it bewilder you? Well, when I was writing that chapter, I received a couple of gifts. One was in the form of information about a group of psychoanalysts who were going to be conducting a conference in Melbourne. And one of the subjects for the conference was the meaning of Mahler's Fifth Symphony. And I thought, well, there's a conference I would pay quite a lot of money not to attend. I mean, Mahler's Fifth Symphony, a monumental work. Fun fact, it's the first symphony for which trombones were ever scored. And you might respond to that symphony in all sorts of ways, but do we need someone to tell us what it means? The second gift was I was watching ABC News one night when I was in the middle of writing this chapter. And I've often wondered whether sport is an art form. Hearing your enthusiastic discussion about AFL and such matters beforehand, you probably think sport is an art form. Professional sport is obviously an arm of the entertainment industry, and we do talk about a high mark as being poetry in motion, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, watching the ABC News, got to the sports report, and a basketballer came on and said, from now on, my team is going to be playing meaningful basketball. I thought, there you are. See what I mean? As I say at the end of that chapter, don't kill the joy or the pain or even the bewilderment of our direct emotional response to any form of art by trying to intellectualize it. I prefer my Mahler, like my basketball, to be meaningless. Well, sometimes we come across quotes that strike us as expressing an idea we hadn't previously thought of, but we're immediately pleased to know it, pleased to know this about ourselves and each other. And for me, about 5 years ago, I came across a quote that's in that category. And in fact, it was the first one to go into this book, the one I was most determined to include. And it was Samuel Johnson's insight about kindness, when he said, kindness is in our power, even when fondness is not. Now, we've discussed this before. I don't expect that you'll remember. But I think that's the most beautiful thing to know about being human. This species we belong to is the kind of species whose members are capable of showing kindness, not affection, not love in the emotional sense, but loving kindness, showing kindness even towards people we don't like, even towards people we could never agree with about religion or politics or culture or footy, even towards total strangers. It's the most, I think, the most wonderful thing to celebrate about being human, that we have that capacity. Now, you won't necessarily agree with all the quotes in this book, and neither do I. In fact, I included one from Socrates just so I could express my strong reservations about it. Perhaps his most famous quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." What an arrogant, elitist remark. In that chapter, each of these chapters is very short, by the way. It's 25 5-minute reads. But in this one, I devoted a couple of pages to celebrating and admiring the examined life. Of course, I'm all in favour of self-examination. But what about people who are cognitively impaired and who just don't have the capacity for self-examination? What about people who are struggling for survival and whose concern every day is where is the next meal going to come from, or where will they sleep tonight? Are we going to say their life is not worth living? I fear Socrates would have said that. He thought the life of slaves and indeed of women were not worth living, that because women were about the equivalent of slaves in the ancient Athenian pecking order. Getting the number of quotes down to 25 was, of course, a major challenge. If you're looking for something to do over Christmas, let me suggest you can have a lot of fun picking 25 quotes and deciding what you think about them. I was very tempted by the American novelist Peter de Vries' famous remark, "Nostalgia ain't what it used to be." And I snuck that into the preface along with Dolly Parton's lovely quote, "I don't care when people call me a dumb blonde because I know I'm not dumb and I know I'm not blonde." And I didn't include, although again it's in the preface, a very wise remark attributed to the Buddha, "Sometimes it's better to be kind than to be right." And the best quote of all time doesn't get a chapter on its own. I'm referring, of course, to what we sometimes call the Golden Rule. It comes to us again from just about every religious and philosophical tradition, expressed sometimes, "Do unto others as you would have others do unto you, treat other people the way you'd like to be treated." I think Confucius expressed it negatively, "Don't treat others in a way that you would not like to be treated." It doesn't get a quote, it doesn't get a chapter to itself because it actually permeates the entire collection. It's foundational to everything I want to say about these quotes, because of course it's foundational to the whole idea of human beings learning to live together in harmonious, sustainable communities. There's a chapter on curiosity based on a lovely quote from Mencius, the Chinese philosopher I mentioned. The great person, he said the great man, but he today would say person, is he who does not lose his child's heart. And I thought, what's the essence of a child's heart? Well, any of you who know anything about kids, been around kids, know it's insatiable curiosity, isn't it? And I think Mencius is right. When we lose that curiosity about each other, about the world around us, that's when we start to atrophy. You hear people saying, "I'm bored." Well, if you're bored, you're going to start to become boring. If we lose interest in others, they'll lose interest in us. There's a chapter on humility based on a very telling quote from Iris Murdoch, who said, "Humility is a rare virtue and an unfashionable one, probably even more unfashionable today in the age of me, than it was 50 years ago when Iris Murdoch wrote that." But she's right to call humility a virtue, isn't she? Some people have called it the queen of virtues because it's absolutely the bedrock on which most of the things we think of as virtues depend, whether courage, kindness, compassion, restraint, forbearance, etc. All depends on us acknowledging that we're all different from each other, but resisting the idea that being different means I'm better. Yes, we're all special, but in a way that means no one's special. We need to recognise that everyone else is just as special as we are. If this is all sounding a bit earnest, I did have a lot of fun writing this book. I think there are some laughs in it. Ian can tell us whether he got a laugh out of it. I mentioned that I had fun with the Susan Sontag quote, and also a bit of fun with a lovely quote from Bertrand Russell, the British philosopher, who said, "Men who are unhappy, like men who sleep badly, are always proud of the fact." Well, man flu notwithstanding, I think this applies to women as well. In fact, the copy editor who worked on this manuscript said there's a woman in her office who gives her colleagues daily reports on how badly she slept the night before. And woe is me is a very popular human refrain, isn't it? It's spawned pretty much the entire country and Western music industry. In the current climate, I think it's become a sort of pathway to celebrity. If you can show how much you've suffered, how miserable, what an appalling childhood you had, you can write a book about it and go on television and become famous for being miserable. And I'm not at all unsympathetic to people in our midst who are miserable and who are suffering and who've been marginalised and oppressed. They need all the love, the compassion, the kindness, and the support that we can give them. But let's be careful not to make misery the headline of our personal story. If we focus too much on the fact that we're the victim of flawed parenthood, well, flawed parenthood is another way of saying parenthood, isn't it? What parent hasn't fallen short of some mythical gold standard of parenthood? But if we do make suffering the headline of our story, we might run the risk of overlooking all the beautiful things that happen to us every day. People who smile at us for no reason, the child who wraps its arms around your legs, the colleague who offers you a word of encouragement, the music that encourages you to get up and dance or sing, the friend who hears your tale of woe and suggests going for a long walk together in silence. If you happen to be old enough, you might enjoy the chapter based on the quote from the American poet Anne Sexton, "In a dream, you are never 80." I had a lot of fun with that quote as well. It's based on a miserable poem about a woman who's in hospital in her 80s, rubber sheets, tubes, wires, etc., misery. And she falls asleep and she's dreaming of herself as an 18-year-old skipping through a meadow, picking wild strawberries. And then a nurse wakes her up and she's very cranky and she says, "In a dream, you are never 80. That gave me a chance to do a bit of a riff on being 80. Don't know if any of you have passed that milestone yet. It is a funny age. Octogenarians have to get used to the idea that when people comment on their appearance or their general health and so on, they'll almost always add the rider "for your age." A couple of weeks ago, I was signing a book at a promotion event for this new book, and a bloke leaned over and said, "You got good handwriting for your age." Well, it's that stage of life. It's also the stage of life when many people announce their age, don't they, with the same sort of precision and pride as little kids. I'm 82 and a half, or I'll be 85 next birthday, and so on. Let me conclude with a comment on perhaps the most challenging quote in the book, which comes from Marianne Williamson, American journalist and political activist, who says, "It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us." Just ponder that. In fact, maybe I should say nothing else, just leave you to read the chapter. But it's I think there's deep wisdom in that. How is it that we are more afraid of the light than the darkness? And what does she mean metaphorically by light? Well, I think the interpretation I'd put on that is she's talking about love, our capacity for love, which does sometimes frighten us. People are afraid of being the fully loving people we are born to be, afraid of being that good. I'm not some kind of saint. We hang back from realizing our full potential as loving beings because it is sometimes easier to retreat into the darkness of cynicism or negativity or indifference or even despair. So one of the most passionate appeals in the book is where I say, don't be afraid of love, of loving or of being loved, because it's how we become our best selves. Perhaps the keynote chapter in the book is the one based on the African proverb we all know, it takes a village to raise a child. And as I say, yes, that's true, but it's only half the story. It takes a village and our connections with each other to keep us all sane. So that's the book. It's designed by the publisher to be a Christmas present. This Christmas, the bookshops are going to be full of murder and mayhem, misery and mushrooms will be a recurring theme. But if you're looking for something to lift people's spirits, just saying might be just the ticket. Thanks, Anne.
Hugh, thank you so much for joining us and walking us through Just Saying. Yes, I would concur with you. A great Christmas gift, and it's available at all the major bookstores. It's always a joy hearing, Hugh, your reflections and insights into the ways that we think and behave, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you for being our guest this morning on Monday Matters, and we wish you and all those who have tuned into Monday Matters throughout 2025 a very happy, restful, and meaningful Christmas. Before we go, I'd like to make a special thank you to Chernham Vern for his outstanding contributions editing weekly Monday Matters. And I look forward to seeing you all again in 2026. Merry Christmas to all.